Here is the main problem with our society. Nobody teaches us how to deal with grief. As a whole, we are taught how to acquire things, not what to do when we lose them. You know what this means for us collectively? Because we're not taught what to do when we've lost something, all we can rely on is our previous knowledge. If our previous knowledge is acquiring things, what do you think happens when we've lost something and we're trying to fill that hole back up with stuff? Acquire more things. It's not weird that when somebody loses something or someone, they turn to things to comfort them or for things to numb them. They add more on. They acquire things specifically to cope. Some methods are healthier than others. For me, what I've been doing is reading a lot. I'm still not dealing with the pain in my heart. This is the common mistake that people make when they lose a pet. People have this really sick idea that pets can be replaced. Again, because we're taught to acquire things, not what to do when we lose things, people won't give themselves time to sit in the hurt and to feel, but instead will go and buy a replica of that dog or cat or animal, or they might not be that cruel. They end up buying another animal. That's not you coping. That's you avoiding, right? That being said, this is not my first rodeo. When I had my first round of losses, I really did not know how to take care of myself, primarily A, because I was young, but B, I was only going off of my environment and my surroundings and what people were taught by their parents, so therefore they passed that on to us as children. And a lot of us may not realize it, but as we get older, those things that were ingrained into us as kids resurface every time a loss comes into our lives. If you can help it, avoid people that have absolutely no idea what it means to grieve. I wish that this was something I had learned and instilled and ingrained in myself sooner, is that when I was grieving and walking around like an open wound, coming to everyone that I could think of for consolation, for help, for support, and as harsh as it sounds, I had it slapped back in my face. Grief feels like love that you cannot express, because that person or pet or place that you love is no longer there in the form that you knew it to be. And that is crushing. It is soul crushing. Sometimes it hurts our experience even more when people are ignorant. And unfortunately in this world, there are so many ignorant people. But I can sense people when they're ignorant, whether it's on purpose or not, and when people are genuine and kind and open. And even the genuine, kind and open people can't always be open with others, because they may also be going through their own thing. Got to stop saying these things to people that are grieving, okay? I cannot tell you how many times people have told me this with regards to any death that I've had to cope with and endure. But the most common thing I heard was, I don't know what to say. I'm going to give you an example. Very sorry if you've lost a parent. If you have, just know you're not alone. I lost my dad last year. Oh my god, it's not even last year anymore. It's 2023. I lost my dad in the end of 2023. So I want you to know you're not alone, and this is in no way to aggravate your situation. This is just honestly like an anecdote of my life. But I want you to picture it this way. So imagine you're my friend and you've just come to me. You're sobbing. You're lost. You don't really know the meaning of life anymore. Your dad has just died. You couldn't have seen this coming. It's not something you would have expected at your age. And furthermore, losing a parent is not something really anyone should have to go through. Inevitably, we are all going to have to go through it, but not this early, right? So you come to me, you tell me, hey, Rain, my dad's just died and I'm in a lot of pain. Was not expecting this to happen. You see, this leaves me in a situation where, let's say in this specific scenario, my dad hasn't died. I have both my parents, and in an ideal world, they are healthy and they love each other. I hit you with, I don't know what to say. Now, how are you supposed to feel with that? Am I saying that the people around us are responsible to mend our feelings? Am I saying that everyone is responsible to play unpaid therapist every time something goes wrong? No. But for the love of God, that is not what you ever tell someone who is going through the worst pain on planet Earth, and that is grief. People may respond in ignorant ways. They may do this because they genuinely have no idea, in which case, I've mentioned this before, if you know someone who really has no experience with grief, really is not adept or open to talking about it, please avoid them at all costs. I've made that mistake too many times, consoling in the wrong people. Do not waste your time. Do not give an inkling of hope to these people, because it's going to scar you and harm you even more. When my dad died, I argued with my best friend. I argued with my boyfriend at the time because they didn't understand. And again, it's not something I want them to understand or expect them to understand, because they didn't lose their parent. Again, please take from my pain and my hurt. Don't talk to people who have zero clue. There is a very small chance that you can speak to someone about something and for them to understand it fully without them experiencing it themselves. Those of us which are not equipped to deal with grief and are not, I shouldn't say that, none of us are really equipped to deal with grief. No matter how many tools we have in our tool belt, it is still difficult. It's so hard. But again, reinstating my message. So my dog has just died. I'll give you guys a little picture. This is my sweet pup. Right now, would not dare to go to my friend who has never had a pet in her life or his life and be like,
so my dog's just died. Can you be that for me?
what the hell are they gonna do? This is me just making gentle humor, but again, maybe that is painstakingly obvious. When you're in so much pain, when you feel like a literal open wound, you're not gonna know the difference between salt and sugar. At least I didn't. So please be very mindful of that. A lot of the times when people open up to others about grief, it's a mixed bag. This bag is people that have a lot of experience on grief. And not only that, but they took action within themselves to get curious about why that pain is there. They got curious in their reflection and learned what this pet, place, person or thing meant to them, and they actually came out stronger because of it. Then there is this bag still has gone through grief, but they never got curious. They never cared to learn more about why they're feeling the hurt that they are. They never cared to explore within themselves pain. The difference between this group and this group. This group is not afraid of their feelings. This group absolutely is. When you think of people that are not afraid of their feelings versus afraid of their feelings, which group do you think will be more helpful to you in that time? People that are not afraid of their feelings. And this is so horrible to have to go through when you're in that space of heartbreak, just gut-wrenching loss, and then also having to put up with people who are just not very healed and don't really have the right things for you. I will say, with every grief experience I've had, it's not just the person or pet that died that I lost. Okay, I cannot stress this concept enough to you guys. It is not just the thing you lose that you're going to lose. There's going to be so much more, and I know that sounds very overwhelming. I promise you, the other people that get weeded out, the other, be it anything, be it a job, be it a friendship, literally anything else that gets weeded out in this period is again to teach you something, and because it wasn't meant for you. And sometimes it takes that extra step to push everything out. It's almost like having a shower, washing your hair, but it's not just your hair that's getting wet, it's your body too. So when it rains, it pours. But this last week or so, I've had very intuitive dreams. I've seen angel numbers. I've had urges to lean into things that'll help me. And again, with this just happening today, I cannot state to you how much everything happens for a reason. In times like this, when grief occurs, it is not the thing that you want to hear, because especially very early on, what we want more than anything is our person back, our pet back. It's hard. It's incredibly hard to reach out to people and to, again, get it slapped back in your face. So I want you to realize the red flags within these people. I don't want to put these people in a bad light, but it is incredibly wrong to be saying these things. And I can't make the message clearer. It's wrong when you tell someone that you don't know what to say. Even if you don't, please, for the love of God, make something up. Go on ChatGPT and write down, like, what should I say? You don't say, I don't know what to say. Be careful of people that are afraid of their feelings. To be honest, if you have people in your circle that are afraid of their feelings and opening up, just avoid them at all costs, because they're not going to help you, because they cannot help themselves. They try to change the subject. I've had this happen a couple of times too, where they will actually deflect on themselves. And you have to be really careful here, because some people like hearing other people's experiences about grief, and you can integrate that into a conversation and make it very powerful. Then there are people who, at least I've noticed in friendships as I grow up, they will ask questions about you only so that they can have more floor time to talk about themselves. Relationships ideally are supposed to be reciprocal, and there are times where this reciprocity cannot be fully accomplished, because again, we have things like grief and loss happen in our lives. But you always try to the best of your ability. And the one way to do that is not by avoiding a subject when somebody brings it up. I hate when people do that. Like, if somebody brought something up into a conversation, it's because it has hurt them enough to want them to bring it to your attention. And we all make these mistakes. Some of us more than others, but ultimately we just need to change the narrative around grief. Like, it doesn't have to be harder than it already is, and a lot of people in our circle, including ourselves, make it a lot harder for ourselves than it already is. In my opinion, the pain of the loss is enough. I want to avoid as much pain inflicted on myself, and I want to avoid as much pain from other people. So if I know that they hurt me once in regards to a grief experience, I'm never talking to them again about grief. It's that simple. I understand it's a very uncomfortable topic, but how are we so comfortable talking about living and not dying when it is still a part of our lives? Like, literally at the end of our life, we die. I had the most dissociation around death when my grandma passed away. I was 16 years old and she passed away from pancreatic cancer. I was on birth control, and I remember I don't think that did very good for my mental health either, but that was the first loss in my life where death scared me, because my grandma was basically like my second mother. I knew her since I was born, and we spent day in, day out together. It's like a similar thing with having a pet. Obviously pets live less than humans do, and again, it may seem like downplaying quite a lot when people say that pet losses hurt more, but it's really to each their own. You cannot discredit somebody else's pain because you yourself don't feel that way. There are some people whose parents' death hurt more than their pet's death. There are some people whose pet's death hurt more than their parents' death. Both are completely valid. The thing I really want to touch on is, I'm going to call this filler, is what people say, and again have been conditioned to say around grief. And this doesn't make them terrible people. It's again just like brainwashed phrases that I hear a lot. And I'm saying brainwashed because it's just something you slap on and it doesn't really help, but everyone seems to use them. Alright, first one being, they're in a better place now. They're no longer suffering. Okay, they may no longer be suffering. We don't have technical proof of that. But I'm suffering. And anyone else who may have been impacted by this loss is suffering. So what are we going to do about that? Is the thing that I want to say every time I hear that. Sometimes it may be read as quite nice and endearing, but that's not all there is to it. Because death is something so unfathomable to the human mind. I mean, like, on this earth, we are the only ones conscious of our own mortality. Like, that is scary. And again, like I've said, I've had that thought living rent-free in my mind ever since I was 16. So, like, this has been habitual for me. And yet I feel like I'm hiding this really deep, dark secret because nobody talks about the fear of death. Death is not something people want to talk about. It's almost like death is stigmatized, but how stupid in a world where we all die. Because the more that you are exposed to it, the more you are aware of it. And I find that religions, not always, but people who are religious and you come to speak to them about death, they may not always have the answers or the things that you are needing to hear at that time. Maybe spiritual souls living in human bodies, but whenever I go through grief, I feel like I'm a human body living outside of a spiritual soul. Like, I feel very lost. I don't know, I'm literally like dissociating right now. I just felt like myself come out my body. Death grounds us, and I will admit I used faith to help myself get through these first few days. It's hard, and I definitely am not discrediting the fact that it can be a great anchor for those who are grieving. And, you know, if you're very in tune with your religion, if it is something that you yourself resonate with and not pressured to do because somebody else wants you to follow that, by all means. When we experience loss like this to such a high magnitude of pain, it makes us question our faith. So anytime you've lost something or someone, how did that make you feel in regards to your religion? I've definitely had those moments in my life where I'm like, there's no way that God is real if I can feel this much pain. Like, shouldn't have God protected me? Personal take is that God is real, and I know religion is very controversial. I almost feel like it's set up to be that way. However, controversy aside, that's your own unique experience. And if you end up feeling a loss of faith because of what you are going through, I do not want you to feel guilty, because I have been there before. If God and believing in God is something that is truly meant for you, it will find its way back to you. There's no pressure, and there should not be a pressure to lean into these things when you're going through insurmountable grief. I've had a myriad of losses in my life, and I now know that I won't lose my faith because of grief. But again, that is my path. That may not be your path. It's okay to not be fine. There are high-functioning grievers and there are low-functioning grievers. And again, it will depend on how many times you've had to go through it. It'll depend on whether you had therapy or not, because that plays a huge part. Whether it's therapy or whether it's going to support groups or talking to people, there is a huge distinction between people who have spoken about it versus people who have suppressed it. When you treat pain like it's not a problem, it's only going to come back 10 times worse, because even though we can numb ourselves out, it's still always going to be there. So again, the major difference I've noticed in my life is when, you know, regardless of how hard it is to speak to people. I'm currently not in therapy, but when my dad passed away and when my grandma passed away, I went to therapy. And I'm very happy that I did, because although grief may be something that never really fully goes away, therapy taught me that painful portion of my life is only a portion. That life does not have to be fully painful. that there are still beautiful things around you, that there are still things that are living and breathing, including yourself, and that the idea of taking a deep breath, which we're about to do right now, is amazing. Okay? So you may have a couple breathing techniques under your belt, you may not. I'm going to teach you one that I use every time I am in a state of anxiety and I can't pick myself up. Like, I literally had an anxiety attack today. I was just in my bed, had a stomach ache, and then I had this tightness around my chest and I couldn't breathe. So I don't know if there is a specific term for it, but I'm going to call it box breath, because for every step that you do, you're going to count to 4. Okay, so when we inhale, we're going to count to 4. We're going to hold the breath at the top, count to 4. We're going to exhale for a count of 4, and we're going to hold at the bottom for a count of 4. Are you ready? Let's do one breath. That's all I ask of you. One breath. Okay? 3, 2, 1. Inhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Now go back to breathing as you normally were. How did that feel? And that was one breath. Imagine what a handful of them could do. Because of how society is wired, and the constant go, 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 wake up at 5 in the morning, have 73 million tasks done by noon, where can we fit grief into our schedule, right? It feels like we can't. Grief feels like the entire world kind of went on this marathon without you, and nobody informed you that there was even a marathon to begin with. So you're stuck in your room, everyone's already ahead of me in this race, and I don't even know where the marathon is taking place. That's how grief feels. And it is sickening how isolating it feels, because we all go through it at different ages and stages of our life. But the thing that kept me afloat in my grief experiences is, again, knowing that I'm not the only person who has gone through this pain, and this is also not the first time I'm going through this pain. I know I've hurt a lot in the past, but I also know all the lessons I've learned and how I've uprooted for it. For me, I'm the biggest advocate for myself and my pain. I know pain sucks, but I will never deny myself to feel. That is the last thing that I will, ever stray away from doing, is letting myself feel. Think how much all of us watching this video right now are going to change 10 years from now, right? 10 years from now, we're going to likely change in appearance. 10 years from now, our rooms are probably going to look different. We may even live somewhere else. We may have different attitudes towards life. We may have different health things going on, not to scare anyone, but again, 10 years is 10 years. We may have different friendships, different relationships. Are you going to be looking after yourself even better than you are now, 10 years from now? Answer me this question: who is responsible for your recovery? You are. So when you're preparing for change and you're starting to recover, that is the question that you have to ask yourself. We may feel like others owe it to us, and this is why I heavily alluded to the first section with how others are not very well prepared to help us deal with loss. While I think it is very important to have others help us and aid us and be there while we are recovering, the recovery in itself really is up to us. There's so many people that will say time heals all. Okay, I love this sentence a lot, because yes, it does, but time itself is not going to heal all. Okay, time is going to do what it has always done, and it is going to pass. It's not about the time itself passing, it's about what you do in the time that's passing that will help you recover in the best way possible. So now the choice is yours. You either work through your grief alone and spend time in self-reflection, getting to know yourself more, because ultimately that's what these situations make us feel, is a desire to go inward. And for some of us, we don't like ourselves enough to care what is going on. And if that's you, please start giving a shit about yourself, because it's insane. You've got the rest of your life with you, and if you don't care about yourself now, do you think that narrative's going to change if you're doing the same fucking shit that you are now? It's not. I'm sorry, I hate to be so harsh, but it's true. It's true. I've said this once before, I think, and I'll say it again. The goal in life is to minimize pain. And pain is inevitable, so I've learned. But you can minimize it in places where you've been hurt before. And when you pledge to yourself, like, I'm not going to get hurt in this situation again by doing this. Again, going back to talking to people that have not been through the same struggles. I pledge to myself to never reach out to people who don't understand the pain that I'm going through, because I know it's a form of self-sabotage and it's going to lead to an argument, and I'm not going to feel good in that transaction of communication, right? So choose. Are you working alone, or are you working with a partner? Because when you're working through grief recovery with a partner, it is very important that it's a respectful relationship. Again, the last thing you want to do this with is a person who is not understanding of the concept of grief, who has not learned, or I guess unlearned the things that are very dated about grief. And again, you don't want to have someone who's kind of emotionally closed off. It's been 40 minutes of me recording and I still haven't said this. Your grief that you are experiencing right now has no deadline. Okay, I'm going to say that one more time. Your grief that you are experiencing right now has no deadline. Why? Because it's not a fucking assignment.
Oh yeah, you're experiencing this loss. Please get better in 3 months from now. I expect that in 3 months you'll have no sadness. I expect that in 3 months you're on your A game.
Guys, there is absolutely zero deadline to grief. Okay? I don't care what anyone says. I don't care if it's been 10 years and you're still hurt and it still feels fresh as if it happened yesterday. That is so fucking valid. Because grief, again, it's not something that anyone should be expected to fully recover from. Some people will say, right, when somebody's going through a breakup, somebody will say,
Yeah, I'm gonna get better in like a month. I'm gonna get better in like 3 months.
do you guys realize that heartbreak is also grief? You're grieving the loss of someone who is still alive. And that is fucking confusing. Are you really going to put a deadline on that? Right? It just doesn't make fucking sense to me. So if anyone is pressurizing you to be better by a certain fucking day, or is saying to you, oh my god, are you still grieving over that? It happened X days ago, X months ago, X years ago. To fuck with them. Fuck them. Okay? Fuck them. I'm sorry. That is so insensitive to the person that is going through their own unique experience. Okay? And maybe, and I feel like some people say that because, life happens.
Right? Like, you gotta carry on with your life. Like, what do you mean you're still grieving?
Okay, is that your fucking grief to experience? Like, don't you have your own shit to do? Why are you commenting on someone else's experience? That's not yours. So fuck off. Okay. I'm going to talk about some strategies that I've been doing to help myself ease into the grief that I have with my dog. Again, it's not even been a week and this is the stuff I've done. I'm not saying that you have to copy exactly what I do. I'm not saying that you have to do it at the exact same pace as me. But again, this is with regards to pet grief and all griefs under the fucking sun. Because again, I am the grief queen. So, here's what I've done for my dog. I drew him. I know his head is super small. I don't draw dogs but part of my grief was trying to find things that help me, because I think one element of grief is, of course, like, you're questioning validity of things. At least this is with me. Like, whenever I've lost somebody, I question if they were real. And I know that's really stupid, like, of course they were real, but because their physical form is not there in the way that you knew it for so long, it makes you question reality for sure. Like, you're thinking to yourself, did I make this shit up? So that's what I did. This is in pen. I will show you the pen that I use. These have been my favorite.
Ever since I was a kid, I've been
These have been my favorite. These are from Muji. It's this Japanese stationery store that I used to go to in the UK. And again, associations are very huge here. So when you have associations with, again, your animal, your family member, friend, partner, whoever it is you may have lost, it is important to know that you've not fully lost them, because these associations that you have with them made you who you are now. And that is so fucking impactful. When we realize that we are a mosaic of everyone we have ever met, there's no fucking way that they will ever be lost. Okay? That is why I've used that pen. I picked my favorite picture of him ever, and there's so many, but this one is my favorite one, because he loved traveling. He was one of them dogs that, like, literally been around the world. Like, it's insane. We got him in the UK and he flew with us all the way to Canada, and he explored a lot of Canada. Like, this dog, again, was very well traveled. So this was something I drew from one of our camping trips. Now, I'm very put together in this video, but I cried so much while doing this drawing. And I was raised around the idea that being emotionally vulnerable is wrong, and I forgive my parents for doing that because it wasn't their fault. It was because of how their parents raised them. But alas, I still held that story with me. That was the story I was telling myself, that, you know, you have to be strong and crying is weak. And all I've been doing this week is crying, and I'm very grateful that I got to experience that emotion in such great capacity, because it shows how much I cared for him. And again, it just feels so surreal that he's not here. One of the hardest parts has been coming home and, like, knowing that he's not here anymore. And here are some pictures of my doggy. I love this one too. This one is with his brother from another mother. Another one here. And his little quirk was, and again, this is not unique in any particular way, but he loved sticks. He was so happy. Every time he found a large stick, like, look at his little pep in his step. See, this was the thing about my dog, and you've got to ask yourself these questions whenever it comes down to losing someone or a pet. What did they teach you? My dog was incredibly sick, and we spent nearly $2,000 in veterinary bills, and the vets could not give us any conclusive answer as to what was wrong with him. So that will forever remain untold, and, you know, it'll forever remain a secret in my story. But even despite him being very sick and struggling, he was somebody who still was so happy and so enthused with life, and still had so much energy despite everything that was going on with him, despite all the weight he was losing. And, like, he was also very incontinent too. It's very painful to have to watch that, but that's what I learned from him, and I'm sure there'll be so many more lessons to come the more that you go through your grief. But that's what's been helping me. It's just reminding yourself that you're not alone, and even if you don't have people to talk to about this specific grief because they'll make you feel like you're not whole, or because they are also closed off and don't want to talk about their feelings, doing these things will help you, because when you're trying to recover from grief and pain, the priority of recovery should be on you. You're in a plane, and obviously this is the worst that could happen, but if the plane is crashing, what do they teach you? Plane is plummeting down, what are they teaching you? Put on your mask first before helping others. And that's exactly what it is with recovery. This is now a work in progress. When I made this graph, I made it probably in the middle of 2024, so now it's the beginning of 2025. I have more things to add to this list, and it is very, very, very personal, so I'm not going to show this by any means, but this is a loss history graph, and I'm going to link this in my description along with the books that I have used to help me recover from grief, and that I will be revisiting myself as I'm navigating this loss of my dog. History graph is a graph that you make of your entire life, and this is very loaded and not really something you tap into until you've done the hard work, the deep work. And again, I'll recommend you a book to start with so that you can eventually, when you're deeper into your recovery, you can work on this. But you make a timeline, a horizontal timeline, so the year that you were born and the year that you're currently living in, and you write down every single loss under the line. You write down every single loss that has happened to you, and at the top, the years that they happened. So you can make this in whichever way you want, but I just did it in chronological order. So 2002 was the year I was born, and then I have 2004. Underneath is my rabbit passing away. Like, that was my first ever grief. And then you draw a line to mark how intense it felt at that time. So for me, see, I'll show a little bit just so you get an idea. But my rabbit dying was not super intense for me grief-wise because I was only 2. I did not understand the concept of grief fully. I understood that he's no longer there and it hurt, but I didn't understand grief. So, you're going to go about it that way until you get to the most present series of events, right? This was difficult. That was probably one of the hardest things I ever had to reflect on, grief-wise, but did it make me so aware of how resilient I am and how much I've went through. So anytime you feel like being a piece of shit to yourself, and every time you feel like treating yourself crappy for whatever reason, I'm telling you, once you make this, you're not allowed to. It's just a rule that I've added. Like, you're not allowed to treat yourself like shit because you have an entire page filled with stuff, filled with losses and painful things that kind of reinforce to you, like, why the fuck am I hurting myself? Why the fuck am I self-sabotaging when I've already had so much happen to me? Right? Grief and loss history graph. That is something you will know when you're ready, you will do. But I want to plant that seed in your mind that this exists and this helped me through my grief, and I will be making a revised one when I've processed the grief of my beloved dog a little bit better. So treat your loss as something very unique. There is a lot to grief, more than just losing the people and the things that we love. There is health-related grief. There is grief that relates to moving house, loss of a place. There are parents that go through empty nest, which is when their children leave the home. That is also a form of grief. Loss of a job is a form of grief, okay? I've mentioned it already. Heartbreak is a form of grief. There are so many factors that go under this umbrella of grief that an umbrella would simply not survive in the rainstorm that it is. That's why it's very important that you take care of yourself in this time.